everybody. Do you hear me well? Good. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. After this great presentation on geopolitics, now we're going to move to energy. So I really want to, we are at the World Policy Conference. Please, we will try to speak about energy, but to make the link with geopolitics. That's always interesting. I'm not going to be too long. We are going to start with a representative of Total. So you say who you are in one sentence, and then you move on. I'm going to be very strict with the time allocated for each panelist. The idea is really to have 7, maximum 8 minutes per person, and then we move on to the discussion. The idea is to have a lively discussion with all respect to each other, and we're not here to find solutions, but the idea behind all what we are doing is what kind of energy mix do we want to have in the future, and according to all different backgrounds that we have. So we move on. Please, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I will present quickly, as asked, the strategy of TotalEnergies. Maybe most of you know it. We're celebrating this year 100 years. It's an anniversary, 100 years. And what is the characteristic of our 100 years is what we call the pioneer spirit, the ability to innovate, and the capacity to adapt to the context of the changing world. That means that our strategy today is adapting to the energy transition with a multi-energy strategy. What is the multi-energy strategy? 2 pillars, oil and gas on one hand, and integrated power, which is electricity, on the other hand. Why? Because some people wonder why we don't stop gas and oil right now. Others are wondering why we keep on producing oil and gas and electricity on the electron at the same time. So I'm going to try to explain why we're doing this strategy of multi-energy. Why oil? You all know that energy transition cannot be done overnight. Demand is keeping on growing. The peak of the demand, we don't know when it's going to be, probably between 2030 and 2040. You know all of the depletion fields of 4%. In addition, we're going to have a rise of energy consumption. Today, 4.5 billion people don't have proper access to energy. By 2050, the world population is projected to be around 9.7 billion. So the demand is here. We have to answer the demand. But at the same time, we have also to do it with the lowest carbon intensity. And that's our strategy. That's what we're trying to do. Before, we used to have something like 70, 80, 40, 60 kilograms of CO2 per barrel. Now, we're about 18 kilograms, and we're going to 13 kilograms of CO2 per barrel. So the carbon intensity is going lower and lower. That's a priority. This is for oil, basically in a nutshell. For gas, we believe strongly that the gas, and we're probably going to talk about it longer, the gas is the energy of the transition. We need gas for many reasons. First, as you know, it emits 2 times less greenhouse green gases than coal for the same amount of electricity produced. It has a key role to play in Asia, where coal still accounts for most of the electric mix in many countries. 63% in China, 72% in India. We have estimated more or less roughly that our LNG sales helped avoid approximately 70 million tons of CO2 emissions globally into 2023. It is also the most mature and cheapest energy source currently available to compensate the intermittency of renewables. Therefore, it is very important to have a firm power in the energy system of tomorrow. And it is also, and you know it better than I do, LNG is also a way to assure energy security because it can go everywhere in the world. This is the reason why gas represents more than 20% of our investment, mainly in LNG. But at the same time, we need a very strong mobilization against methane emissions. And that's where we are also very mobilized. The reducing methane emissions in the short term is the faster way to prevent the most severe impact of climate change. That is why we pledge to reduce our methane emission for our operated activities by 50% for 2025 and 80% for 2030 compared to 2020 emissions. To do it, we need to detect and evaluate measure the leaks with very, very precise tools. One of them is OSEA, a drone program that allows us to detect and measure CH4 and CO2 emission at our sites and repair leaks when we discover some. And we have also to work collectively with other companies to fight against methane leaks. We committed now with more than 50 oil and gas companies to reduce our methane production to close to zero and eliminate flaring for our operation by 2030. We're 55 companies engaged in this pledge, representing 45% of global production. And we are one of the three champions with ADNOC and Aramco working on the decarbonization charter. Oil, gas, and electricity, the second pillar. For us, electricity is the energy of the future because it is the energy of decarbonization. We saw it clearly in the mobility sector, but it is going to be the energy of the future. We have demographic growth. We saw that with this demographic growth, with this global south wanting to, aspiring for a better standard of living, we know that 700 million people live without access to electricity. So those people are going to need more and more electricity. At the same time, we have also a need of electricity coming with all the development of data center, digitalization, artificial intelligence. and other process. So we will definitely need more and more electricity. So that's why we're investing a lot in clean electricity based with renewable. And we are covering the entire electricity value chain from production to distribution, so we can manage the intermittency of renewable to provide firm, clean, and low-cost energy for our customers. And we have demonstrated that it's a viable economic model for low-carbon energies. In 2023, we achieved 10% profitability in our electricity activities. I'm saying that because profitability is very, very important if we want companies to invest in renewables and in this new electricity, low-carbon electricity. Our target is 35 gigawatts in 2025 and 100 gigawatt in 2030. And we invest more or less around $5 billion in this low-carbon renewable and low-carbon energy. In conclusion, we changed our name in 2021. We now are TotalEnergies, but even though people are always saying Total instead of TotalEnergies, because we believe that the energy transition needs a multi-energy strategy. And I don't want to be any longer. I'm ready to answer any questions, if there is any, and I give you back the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. One question to you. You said that gas is a transitional fuel or fuel of transition. What does it concretely mean, and how do you deal with this wording at the international level?
This wording, you mean?
Yes, gas as a transitional fuel. What does it mean, and how long, and you know, the storytelling behind this word?
Transitioning fuel, why? Because it is the best way so far to stop the intermittency of the renewable. So it is needed for the intermittency. Battery storage and things like that are not really, really mature, and so we need gas for this. Transition also because if we switch from coal to gas, we will, like I said, we will divide by 2 the emission of CO2 if we also fight against methane leaks. So that's why it is the energy of the transition. As long as we don't have another system of storage for storage the energy, it looks like with the intermittency we have no other solution.
And the transition, how do you see this transition?
How many years you mean?
Yeah, how long? It's a journey. Because
yes.
That's part of the, at the COP we always discuss these issues.
Yes, that's right.
We are talking now about transitional fuels, but what does it mean concretely?
I think it is not only depending on one company or one country. That's the point. Transitioning, you need to have everyone on board. And so far, we can see at all the COPs 29, the COPs 28, we don't have a feeling that everybody is united on the trajectory, on the aims, on the objectives. I think we have Global South with priorities that are different from net zero countries and I would say Global North. They don't have the same priorities, and at the same time we are sharing the same planet. So we're going to have to get along. So answering how long and how far and so for how many years we're going to need gas is a very difficult question.
Thank you, sir. Now we move to LNG. Good transition to LNG. We have the specialist of LNG. Jean, I don't... please, do you have the presentation? Sorry. Do you have the presentation? All right. Thank you so much. Jean?
Okay, thank you very much. I will try to make it short and simple. Some issues have been already evoked by Mr. Abed. So the first slide, please.
Can you please put the microphone next? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So on this slide, look on the right. The main takeaway of this slide is that the needs for energy consumption are growing in the world. But the pace of growth is going down. From 2000 to 2010, the growth per annum was 2.5%, and from 2010 to today, it's only 1.5%. So there is a growth in the need for energy, but the rate of growth is slowing down. Then, at the same time, the world CO2 emissions are still growing, but at a lower pace. It was 2.8% from 2000 to 2010. Now it's 0.7%. So the bad news is that the CO2 emissions are going up, but the rate of growth is going down. And why is it possible? It's because the renewables, the pace of development of renewables is increasing dramatically from 4% to 7% per annum, but at the same time, natural gas is replacing coal for some usage of electricity generation, especially in Asia, but also in Europe. On the next slide, I will focus on LNG. LNG is, I don't think it's this one, it's yes, this one, thank you very much. The LNG is growing much faster than natural gas. Why? It's because there is no new project of pipe gas, and the existing projects, such as Russian gas, are going down. So the pace of growth of LNG is rather steady, and the good news for that is that it provides to the world energy system a lot of security and flexibility. We have seen that for Fukushima, when all the LNG which was supposed to go to Europe flew to Asia to replace nuke in Japan. And we have seen that, of course, in 2022, after the Ukrainian invasion, where the pipe gas was shut dramatically and replaced by LNG without intervention of the government. It's only the market which was efficient, and through the price signals, which was able to redirect LNG from Asia to Europe. So the main source of the growth of LNG is, of course, United States and also Qatar, and with the exception of Europe because of the Ukrainian crisis, the main market for LNG is Asia, China, India. On the next slide, yes, this one, you can see that in 2023, a lot of regasification projects were built in two places in Europe because of the Russian gas crisis, and in China, where the pace of development of use of LNG is amazing. On the next slide, you can see the comparison between the growth in the liquefaction capacity and the regasification capacity. You can see that on the right, you can see that in 2024-2025, there is a huge growth in regasification capacity, especially in Europe, but not only, when the liquefaction capacity is going to come on stream later, mainly in 2026, 2027, from the United States and from Qatar. So today, the rate of utilization of the regas capacity in the world, but especially in Europe, is rather low, which provides, again, a lot of capacity of re-optimization and possibility to resist to the shock, which is rather significant. And then my last slide is to give you a snapshot on something which is not much talked about. It is the use of LNG in the sea transportation. And you can see that on the containers, on the car carriers, on the bulk, and on the cruise, there is a huge increase in the number of ships which are going to use LNG instead of heavy fuel, which is a good news for the CO2 emission. So I have two takeaways to stress and one question which I hope will be discussed later on today. The main takeaway is LNG is growing very fast, probably plus 60%, 60, over the next 10 years. It provides a lot of flexibility, security, and capacity to resist to the shock, Fukushima, Ukraine. And my main question, and I think we should discuss this today, is, and especially I read last week in a French newspaper, but not only, that new liquefaction projects are climate bombs. And it is true that if you calculate the CO2 emission during the whole life of a liquefaction project, 25, 30 years, the number of tons of CO2 at stake is huge. But to me, to do the full calculation, we should also take into account the CO2 emission which are avoided by new liquefaction projects. And since it's not possible to replace from one day to the other all the gas project by renewables or nuke, the only alternative, short term, is coal. So to me, it's a real issue of communication. If we start to calculate the CO2 emission attached with a new LNG project, we should also take into account the avoided amount of CO2 which would have been emitted by alternative fuel, which is today, if we assume that renewable is at the maximum state of development, it is coal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe someone wants to react. Yes, please, Majdi.
Yes, thank you very much. There is also the issue of carbon capture that can also be mixed with when it is starting to be a mature process, and so carbon capture is also should also be taken into the equation, I think.
I agree.
No.
I agree with that. Carbon capture at the level of the production of gas, at the level of liquefaction, the trend is to replace natural gas compressors by electricity compressors, CH4 methane track to avoid methane leak at the liquefaction. And you have all this kind of project, but maybe we will discuss this later today, of synthetic methane, synthetic LNG, but it's the economic profitability is still to be demonstrated, but you can produce synthetic methane with hydrogen, which is itself produced by renewable, and CO2 sequestration to have a cycle of CO2, a full cycle of CO2 without additional emissions. But today, the economic profitability of this kind of thing are still to be proven, but it will probably happen sooner or later.
Thanks. Nicolas.
Thank you. Maybe just Nicolas Piau, the CEO of Tilt Capital. Maybe one point on avoided emissions. I frankly fail to see how you could justify avoided emissions on such a project, because unless you are able to demonstrate that the base case scenario, and I think this is what you were alluding to, is actually coal being the reference technology. I think first you need to do it market by market, and then you need to do the horizontal allocation to say that it's LNG that is actually flowing to the gas power station that is replacing the coal power station. So in my view, I do believe, as the previous speaker and yourself were saying, that gas is a transition fuel. I absolutely believe in that. In my view, it's probably a 10 to 15 year period, and then the question is, how do you cope with that? We could discuss this. But I think we need to stand firm on or to assume the fact that it is a transition role, a transition fuel, and I think it's very important not to try to justify it through avoided emissions, because I think it will be a blowback to the industry if we try to green it in a way that is ungreenable, in my view.
I agree with you, and I think you're right when you say that it's very difficult to make this kind of mathematical compensation. One way to do it would be to have a world carbon market. It would probably be the easiest way to measure things. It's easier in the concept, it's not easy to implement, and today, with the exception of Europe, this idea is not very well advanced, and as long as you have countries such as China, India, or United States who are not going to join the CO2 market, it's very difficult to progress on this issue.
Yes, Majdi. Please, your microphone.
I don't want to take the floor too many times, but I just want to react and be sure that I understood. So you're thinking that if we have LNG going to Asia and replacing all the coal industry, it won't be enough to justify avoided emission?
No, of course it is indeed a direct benefit of that. I'm just saying that what is actually and it's a topic common to all avoided emission calculation, it's horizontal allocation. So where do you make this avoided emission start? Is it the operator of the CCGT, or is it the supplier of gas? So I do agree it absolutely contributes, but if you want to have a stable supply of gas, you generally need both LNG and pipe gas. You need optionality. That's my only point.
Thank you, Nicolas. I leave the floor to Jeffrey, and then we move to Igor.
Thanks. I'm Jeff Lewis from the law firm of Cleary Gottlieb. I just wanted to address the timeline for a transition period. It seems to me that the timeline, in theory, should be tied to the period that's required for two things to happen. One, for the technology to evolve to a point where you could have a more fully renewable system. That technology is got two components. One is energy storage, and the second is smart grid systems that allow you to bounce the energy around very, very quickly. The second piece of it, obviously, is the investment required for the development of renewable energy projects to fulfill the demand. I think Nicolas is probably right that 10 to 15 years is probably the right time period for both those things to mature. But we've got a problem, and I just want to throw out the problem to the group. And I agree that natural gas is going to be the necessary stabilizing source of energy during this transition period. But the problem is that, and I know this because I see it every day as a lawyer that's trying to help develop these projects and finance them, is you can't finance an LNG project unless you have a 30-year commitment for the offtake of the gas. And the question for the world really is, how do we balance the need for these projects to come online, and we're going to need them, as you say, we're increasing over the next 10 years, without being locked in to natural gas for 30 years?
It's a very good question. To me, it's the question for the industry. I was on the board of Tellurian, a US-based company which has been trying to develop a liquefaction project. We have sold the project to Woodside because without long-term commitment from the utilities, you need an equity part in financing of the project which is used. Typically, a liquefaction project is between 15 and 30 billion dollars. So if you need 60, 70% of equity, it takes between 10 and 20 billion dollars of equity. So only the big players can do that. The amount of risk is significant. On the other hand, since the market is a world market, and you can more and more optimize the flows between Asia, Europe, and America, you can make sure that within the life of the project, you will have time where you make huge margin at the cost of gas. Today in the US, the Henry Hub is 2.5. In Asia, it's 12. So there is room for making profit, but without any guarantee. So it changes dramatically the way you finance the project.
Thank you, Jean. Igor, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Igor Yurgens. I'm from GIIGNL University of Moscow, the Center of the Sustainable Development. I have the slides, but first of all, they repeat a little bit the slides of predecessors, so I won't use it. Second of all, I'm taken by your idea of talking about global governance here, rather than the nitty-gritty of carbon emissions and stuff like that. We have an international global instrument of COPs, right? So COP29 at the moment was not so good at all for the developing world, for the global south. You heard of the position of the Indian delegates and the delegates of some other countries, that was a failure, both in terms of financing of the process, but also of the psychology and philosophy of the process. It's a big question mark whether the present form of shareholding capitalism can deal with all these 17 issues or objectives of the sustainable development, including social justice, corporate governance, etc. But when we go back to the energy, you know that there is always two warring factions of mitigation and adaptation. From this point of view, COP29, which adopted this Baku Declaration on Adaptation, won over those who say that cut on carbons, no matter what. Okay, so adaptation is a different thing. Of course, there was a big stress on hydraulic and water resources in this declaration. It was important for the country like Baku, who has a big coastal line and everything. But adaptation as a theory of using the earth to adapt and to the emissions is a theory which is more to the liking of some of the regional gatherings. And second thought, which I would like to stress, we saw that the developing and the developed world is very much divided on that. And of course, what TotalEnergies is saying, or you are saying, is very good, technologically advanced, and when we drop in hydrogen and all of those new excellent developments, but then how do you finance that in the developing world, where the money comes? And we all know that this 100 billion, which was reached with great difficulty, 100 billion of adaptation fund for the developing world, now grew up to 300, and then the calculation of the developed world said, no, wait a minute, 1.3 trillion we need, and this is peanuts. Okay, so all of this, in terms of global governance, we're discussing here at WPC. All of this becomes more and more difficult and less and less reachable. So our take from COP29, when we were under Damascus sword of Damocles sword of Trump's decision to get out again from the Paris agreements, is that let's do it on the regional basis. So much so that, for example, Russia is excluded from the general cooperation, not only on gas, but also on technology transfers and all of that stuff. What we need for sustainable development and decarbonization in Russia sometimes is said that it's dual usage and it's out of bounds for Russians. So from this point of view, we're talking about BRICS SHOS developments, and we had a couple of big meetings here, and I agree with you that China and India will play its own game. Russia would be ready to go along with the world carbon market, for example, with methodology which we understand. How much we emit, how much we calculate, how much we trade, etc., etc. But India and China at the moment are not ready to, and plus you said, American market for 4 years to come is not forthcoming at all. So from this point of view, on the regional basis, we will try to do something. And in terms of a success, yeah.
Just to, when you say regional, what do you mean by regional? You mean BRICS, what we just heard?
We start with BRICS, but now we play with the idea of SHOS, which is a little bit larger than BRICS. BRICS is an organization which they don't even have a secretariat. It's a club which once a year, twice a year say something, but SHOS has a secretariat, has a staff, has people to do things. So from this point of view, what we write in our center, we write for SHOS rather than for BRICS. So, and from this point of view, we're working on the methodology of the carbon market, then on the carbon stock exchange, and all of this. In Russian concrete context, and I will end here, I would say that the most successful thing which we managed is the so-called Sakhalin experiment. It's a big island where the net zero will be reached in 2025 through adaptation, huge forestation on one hand, and the calculus of each emitter and the quota, and then you can trade on the stock exchange. If you emit more, then you buy the carbon units, or vice versa. So from this point of view, we start from next year the multiplication of this Sakhalin thing. And of course, we work hard with Chinese because the Western idea of overcapacity of China is good for us. We're not against overcapacity of China because we would love to buy all of those solar and turbines and etc. We're not afraid of that. Whereas, of course, Western Europe and the United States say that China overproduces all of this and dumps up the market and the workforce. So from this point of view, I would say that from now till, I don't know, COP31 or something like this, we have to work out how the regions will work on the net zero and then come together again. Because COP29 in Baku showed that BRICS SHOS is one thing. European Union by far ahead of us, and that's good enough for us as neighbors. United States getting out of Paris agreements. well, we'll hear from our colleague from Argentina what's going on in this part of the world. But there is no global governance. And without global governance, as colleagues said, no go. Okay, we will be good in the north. They will be very bad in the south. So where's the net zero? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Igor. Appreciate it. Maybe Marc-Antoine, you want to react to what has been said?
I can maybe add a little bit. Yes, thank you so much, Valérie. Yeah, I think fully agree. The COP latest Baku meeting showed that I mean the parties are very, very far from one another. But nonetheless, and I think Majdi alluded to that, but also Jean, I mean, there is a clear number of things everyone can do without coming to an agreement over what trajectory we will have and what cooperation mechanism, etc., we will have. And I mean, we are talking about emergencies, and what can we do in an emergency? It's clearly to address the issue of fugitive methane emissions. And here, I mean, frankly, Igor, I'm sure you will agree, but I mean, Russia can do a lot in this field. And
when it gets out of the loop, which itself get into with Ukraine, yeah. After that, yes, we can do a lot.
Yeah, but even, I mean, the sooner the better. I mean, but for both. Now, frankly, I'm pleased that Majdi raised this fundamental issue. Because yes, natural gas will see a continued increase in demand, that's for sure. It's very flexible, etc. But in order to really improve the emission footprint versus coal, and to really empower the renewables, I mean, we have to do more on the fugitive methane emission side. And there is clear leaders, there is clear coalitions that are being built, but there are still many parts of the world that are excluded from this. Not because they are not around the table, it's simply because, obviously, this hasn't reached to them. So maybe the BRICS, maybe the SHOS could also take this on board. And even China is moving on addressing the issue of coal bed methane emission. So there's progress there, but here in the region, Iran, in Africa, in Nigeria, a lot of flaring still in Africa. So that should be addressed in emergency. And by the way, as you know, the fugitive methane emissions, they are not only from the energy sector, they are also from the waste sector, and of course from the agricultural sector. And that leads me to my second point on voluntary carbon markets. I mean, clearly these voluntary carbon markets, they were an issue at COP in Baku, and we have seen some progress, which I mean, it's been disputed, but nonetheless, it's good, it moves forward. And my point is the following. I mean, the most clearest, efficient, in my view, voluntary carbon market is, for example, related to, reducing the methane emissions from landfills. Because this you can really account. You know that most of these emissions come from developing countries because they have these landfills, etc. And you know that there is no way to basically address this problem because there's no money there. So that is clearly, I think, an area where we should have efficient voluntary carbon markets that reduce the fugitive methane emissions from these areas, and we can account for that. There's no dispute about whether the trees grow or not, or whether they will burn or not, etc. I mean, this is all measurable. Second aspect of these voluntary carbon markets, and to make the bridge also about the point on energy access and clean cooking, actually. I mean, here as well, clean cooking, we know how much wood and biomass is being burnt. We know what are the solutions, what are the costs, what are the business model to bringing the solutions to improve clean cooking, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And again here, the voluntary carbon markets could really step in. Another point maybe to add to the discussion relates to the rollout of renewables. We've seen and we've heard, and Igor also alluded to that. I mean, the Chinese are really empowering the world with that, that's for sure. Now, everywhere in the world, what you now see, and we have the problems in the north, but in the south it's even more dire, is the problem of grids, right? So the underinvestment into grids is absolutely dramatic. So what would be fantastic is that, you know, the BRICS Development Bank, the European Union's development support, whatever is left from the United States, etc., everything now should be further focused into supporting, you know, with loans and various types of finance solutions, these grid modernization and expansion projects in the emerging world. I think these are low-hanging fruits. Often these companies are, you know, financially weak, if not almost bankrupt, and, you know, just bailed out on a year-to-year basis by their governments. And really that would make a huge difference, because the solar PV technology is there, the manufacturing capacity is there, it's diversified. By the way, it's no more only China. We've heard yesterday that it's expanding in India, etc. So, but the bottleneck is really with the grids, and so and for gas to play its backup role, by the way, you will also need the grid as well. Voilà, so a couple of points just for my side, and the last word is, I mean, yeah, I really regret that in the global governments, the fight against coal has been so weakened, and that is so we do a few steps forward, but that is a major step back.
Thank you, Marc-Antoine. Please, sir.
Oui, Jean de Cavazoé. Who in this room believes that there is 1% chance that we'll have zero emission in 25 years from now? Is there anybody who believes that? So let's be serious. Don't make scenario which goes backward, and try to make scenario which goes forward, knowing the existing technology, the existing demand, and try to fight these beliefs. There's no chance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Igor,
just
yes.
one word to this.
Yeah.
In 2030, United Nations will reconsider the goals, the 17 goals of sustainable development. And yes, they will take into consideration that we're far behind 1.50 compared to the industrialization. But that doesn't matter that we should put ourselves in ambitious goals, right?
Just to follow up on what you mentioned, Marc-Antoine, the fight against coal. I'm just back from 3 days at the UN ESCAP in Bangkok on the region. It was a gathering of all regional commission, and there was representatives from the Asian Development Bank, and it was clearly said, we come to a point where, for example, Indonesia, all these countries that are using a lot of coal, we don't have the tool to advise them how to switch from coal to gas. We don't simply have the tool from a financial point of view. We have the international, and it was said like this, we have the international pressure not to invest in fossil fuels, which means gas for the time being. So what do we do? And it's clearly said that they come to a point that the fight is, yes, they admit, come to a point, what do we do? So you put some ammonia, you put some things, but okay, the fight is very low. Yes, Nicolas.
And just to add very quickly on what you said, Valérie, you know, we need to look at the very practical things here. Just replacing coal with gas is not just saying, okay, we replace one plant with another. It's a whole logistics. The places where the ports, the coal ports are not the same ones as where the gas regasification are. The gas system is not in place. I mean, typically we had a big power plant where there was an NG in Indonesia, central to the power system, 1.4 gigawatt. You cannot bring that plant down, or you bring the system down. There is no way you bring gas to that plant. So of course you could say, I close this plant and I build it somewhere else. But you do need to build it in a place where it is convenient for the system, where this current coal plant is located. So the logistical aspect is very critical.
And I would add the workforce and the people and the local people that work in this sector, from the coal to the other one. How do you switch from this? Nothing is done. And I would say the international community is facing huge problem. And it was clearly said, ASEAN, in all the ASEAN meetings, we come to this fact that, yes, we are facing huge difficulties. Please, sir, and then we move to the next, you two. Yes, sir.
Yes, just a question actually. Were the indication that the fight on coal was not as with an impulse as was hoped, when was that actually considered? I mean, is there a precise moment? I'm sorry, I don't know that.
We actually saw it at COP28 in Dubai and again in COP29 in Baku. Huh? And it is related to India, and India is not alone. And many are happy India goes to oppose that, because so they can hide behind India and don't have to show their flag. But this bad news for the environment. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
Sir,
thank you.
please.
So that's another way of addressing Jean's remark. But I have a question, maybe to the scientists, to the academics at this panel. Elon Musk said that within 50 years there would be two reasons fossil fuels are needed. It is military and for launching rockets. All the rest can be renewables. What do you think of this stance, and is this a way to address the transition?
Who dares? Majdi?
I heard scientists and academics, so I'm
Okay,
not of them. But I can give my point of view, but I'm not.
Try to say something.
No, I think that, like we said, it's a global issue. So saying that in 10, 15 years or in 2050 we're going to don't need, or we're going to find the solutions, or technical solutions, or whatever, I don't know. I really don't know. We thought that we're going to have the oil peak or the peak oil very quickly. Now we're seeing that even the AEA is saying it's going to take time. We saw at COP29 that it is not that easy, that we have a huge issue about money, about greed, about many, many things. So it's very hard to say that in 2050 we won't need any more oil or any more gas, and that everything, even hard to abate industries, are going to use renewable. Honestly, I don't know. I think that we have to be precautious to prepare what we can and act on what we can do, what we know. Now we know that, if with some caveat, we know that gas produces less emissions than coal, that it is the energy of transition, so we should push it and help to develop it so we can avoid more emissions. We know that CCS and CCUS can help also to have less emissions. We have to work on emissions, I think, more than the best mix, future best mix. No oil at all, no gas at all. I don't know, because I don't know how we're going to do it.
How do you answer to the practicalities that were referred to? I mean, it's not the same port, it's not the same network, you don't have the pipes, etc. And so it looks as though we are extremely far from the transition. I mean, yeah, maybe there is a transition energy that is disposable, but we don't really know how to use it, if I understand it right.
I think that if we want to develop it, we can build. We can have liquefaction industry. We can have boats. You know, FSRU, we can have, there are some solutions for developing gas. This is, I don't think it is the issue. Of course, you cannot develop it everywhere. Of course, it is also an economic matter. If gas is cheaper than coal at one moment, and we're going to have lots of LNG coming in the world, maybe it's a way also to avoid coal. I don't know.
You can play on the growth of the need on new projects. It's what is happening in India and in China. You do not replace coal power plants by gas power plants. But since the needs are growing fast, you can ensure the growth by new gas-fired station. I think it's one possibility of answering your question.
Yes, Mr. Chalmin.
Just a question, which is a question of price. Don't you think that the problem with natural gas is that it has become a commodity? That is, more, you have less, I think, less and less contracts with fixed price, more and more spot prices. And I was very surprised because years ago I thought with the development of FSRU, many countries, developing countries, could switch from a coal power station to gas thanks to a small FSRU. And many people told me, well, it's impossible because, well, coal prices are unstable, but, well, we manage it with natural gas prices, which are highly unstable. Look at what's happened now. We are around $15 per million BTU, where we were at, what, 5 or 6 months ago. So don't you think that the problem is with you, I mean the producer of LNG, not to go back to long-term fixed price contracts?
So I propose, Jean, you answer, and then we have 2 lawyers in the room. So we move to Jeffrey and then to Tomás. All right? Good.
I'm going to speak under the control of the lawyer. No, I think the question you raise, it's a very vast question, and there are many aspects behind that. So historically, the price of gas was linked with the price of oil for a lot of reasons we know. And because the gas market was under development, the main competitor was oil, and that there was a risk-sharing mechanism between producer and consumer. The consumer took the risk of the market, and the producer took the risk of price, so they had to make sure that at any time the gas could compete with oil. Today, you are right, it's no longer the case. There are still historical contracts based on oil, but now I think that between 30 and 40% of the gas market is spot. So you have a gas market with a price in Europe, a gas market with a price in Asia, and a gas market with a price in the US. Asia and Europe are correlated with each other. It's more or less the same price, unless there is a crisis. And US is much lower. The prices are much lower than the prices in Asia and in Europe. And we could also debate that because it gives US a huge competitive advantage for their industry. But it's another story. So today we have a gas market which is efficient. When the Ukrainian crisis happened in 2022, I read everywhere in the newspaper that the LNG market, the US made a huge amount of money, the prices were much higher than the Russian price. That's true. But without this LNG market, there would be no price at all and no gas at all in Europe. So there would be a huge market shock in Europe, which didn't happen because of the flexibility of the market and because today we have a real price, gas prices indicator, which is efficient. The challenge is how do you finance the new project without long-term commitments? And the answer to that could be that when you build a car industry, a car factory, you do not sell long term for 20 years the production of your factory. So with the gas, it could be the same. The bankers, the private equity fund, and the consumer and the producer could take the risk of the market, but as we said, it takes more equity and less project finance.
Thank you, Jean. Sir, I propose you keep your question after the presentation of Jeffrey. Please, you have the floor.
Thanks. So I'll just add one, I'll start with a note that follows on that conversation, because I think there's another complexity, I think, to the long-term contractual commitment issue that you're referencing, and that is what I'm seeing is consumers of energy, so system operators, often they're government agencies, but sometimes not, utilities, have become, especially in the developing world, and I'm going to talk about Latin America in a moment, very concerned about entering into long-term contracts for energy because they are looking at it from the consumer point of view and a concern that they're seeing prices continue to drop. They're seeing the marginal cost of energy continue to reduce as more gas is supplied in the world, as renewable energy renewable production becomes a greater proportion of the energy mix. Marginal cost is decreasing. And so if I'm a utility or a system operator, I'm going to be very reluctant to enter into long-term commitments for energy, whether it be power purchase agreements, which then tie into gas supply agreements. If I'm constantly watching the marginal costs go down, and I realize that what's going to happen is that very shortly I'm going to be overpaying for energy if I'm agreeing to a fixed cost. So that's another reason why we're going to have to come up with another model for financing these projects. Maybe the model that you articulate is the one that people are going to start to look to, where people take greater risk. Maybe it means that governments need to play a bigger role in the financing of the energy upgrade of the system, because I'm not sure they're the ones who have the long-term incentive to ensure that there is a transition to renewable energy commitment regionally and otherwise.
Except that they are doing, the government, exactly the contrary.
Exactly. You're totally
Today,
right.
when a bank is supposed to finance an oil and gas project, they are blacklisted and say, oh, look at these ugly people, they are financing a climate bomb.
Yes.
So it's unacceptable.
Yes.
And today, SocGen, BNP Paribas, which were at the head of the project finance in oil and gas, they do not finance
Don't do
anymore.
it at all. Yeah, exactly.
So it's a real issue.
It's a real issue. Let me turn to just a lot of the things that have been said are things that I think are relevant to Latin America generally, but I'm going to cover a couple of issues that I think are that the region's facing that are relevant to this group. One is LNG is not an economical solution from a consumer's point of view in Latin America. So LNG is not going to be a solution to the Dominican Republic's ability to transition to cleaner energy away from coal. You're going to need to find other solutions for that group. And then within the rest of the region, it's really a pipeline-based transportation approach to gas. And so that's where natural gas is going to be spread throughout the region. As a general matter, you're not going to see LNG, for the most part, being transported from Peru to some other place in the region. It's just not going to be economical. What LNG is relevant, obviously, for the region because Latin America is rich in natural gas resources, and so there's lots of opportunity, and we've seen that start to develop for development of LNG plants and export opportunities. I'm going to point, though, to two issues that I've seen in that as that development has occurred. One is political tension because there's a great need for gas in the region to stabilize and convert from coal to a greener energy source. There's a lot of political tension between local supply of gas and gas for LNG. So I'm going to use Peru as an example. Camisea gas fields in Peru, very rich in gas, and were developed mainly for purposes of export. Through an LNG facility was built. It cost $5 billion to build the LNG facility, and it cost $30 billion to develop the Camisea gas fields. The only way that the Camisea gas fields would have been developed is to be able to get an export price for the gas. But in Peru, there's tremendous political tension because there are constant blackouts in Lima because there still is not stable electricity supply in Lima and in many other cities and communities in Peru. And that's causing tremendous political tension within the country because gas is available, but it's going to LNG for export. So that's one of the issues that people are going to need to deal with. And I think, it's an industry issue, it's a governmental issue, it's a pan-regional issue. The second issue that I want to highlight that I've seen in Latin America relating to gas and LNG is the there's a great concern about the patrimony of these countries and how and sovereignty over natural resources. And a big issue in a number of these countries where there are ample resources is how to balance that concern about giving away the natural patrimony to foreign investors versus the need for attracting capital. And Mexico, to me, is the sort of poster child of this, where Mexico should be in a position where it's a net exporter of gas, and in fact is a net importer, and it's really because of this issue. They have not been able to resolve that fundamental conflict. So I just want to highlight those two issues. I want to turn quickly to, I think it's the issue that Igor raised about investment, attracting investment in developing economies, and I see this all the time in Latin America. Latin America is, I think, facing a crisis in terms of an investment deficit in the energy transition, and there are a couple of reasons for that. But the foremost reason for that is that the political risk associated with investing in Latin America and the adjusted rate of return that people are seeing in Latin America based on that political risk and the prospective growth in Latin American economies, as you compare it to its regional neighbor, which is the US, is just pales in comparison. And so to give an example, private equity 10 years ago, US private equity firms, Canadian private equity firms, European private equity firms were at the forefront of investing in Latin American energy development. They were investing in gas infrastructure, they were investing in renewable energy infrastructure, and they really led the way in that investment. They are all exiting. The trend now is those groups are all exiting from their Latin American investments in large part because they realize that the political instability means that they can't control their own exit horizon. It's too unpredictable. And so they've exited and they're redeploying their capital to the US where the risk-adjusted rate of return is much higher. So this to me is a fundamental problem. It's not just for Latin America, obviously, as we heard, but it is a fundamental problem for Latin America is how it's going to address this capital deficit that is the result of the combination of infrastructure instability and comparative growth to other opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. Sir.
Thank you. So Jeremy Fain again from BWI, yet again. So my question is the following. We have not, as of now, heard two words in this discussion, and these two words are hydropower and nuclear. Whilst hydropower is still the #1 renewable energy globally, even though it's going to be overtaken by solar someday soon, and nuclear is not a perfect energy source, obviously, but it's still zero carbon. Why so? Hydropower has a lot of untapped development potential in Africa, mostly South Asia, South America, Southeast Asia. And it helps system balancing. One topic we've covered with intermittency, and nuclear provides huge capacities that are absolutely necessary for fast-growing demographies, so big cities. So what is, I mean, is the reason these words have not been pronounced? And how do you envision these two energy sources as being part of the mix fast forward in 2050, for example? Thank you very much.
I don't know, I don't have anything to say about nuclear, but I do have something to say about hydropower as it relates to Latin America, which is, it was an important opportunity and investment focus, I would say, 10 to 20 years ago. And there are two issues with hydropower that have stalled further development of hydropower plants in Latin America. The first issue is instability resulting from climate change, because you have much greater uncertainty about the availability as a result of droughts increasing and things like that. So that's one issue that people have scared people in.
For example, in Brazil, that was the case, especially in Brazil.
Brazil is one of the primary. Yeah. And the second thing, and it also relates to Brazil, is the increased local opposition on environmental and social impact of hydropower projects is substantial. It is at the level, that kind of opposition is at the level of carbon-based projects. It is almost impossible in Brazil, in Chile, in just about any other jurisdiction to get permitting today for hydropower projects because of the community opposition to hydropower, because there's a substantial impact on communities. You basically have to, in order to build a hydropower project, you have to reroute rivers and create dams that completely change the geographic space, and so you've got to totally displace communities. And
this is for dams, but not for runoff river hydropower.
That's true. That's true. But
runoff river. Yeah,
but runoff river has its own impact on communities because it has overflow, and you still have to protect communities, and as a result, they create buffers.
Nicolas.
And just on runoff river, I think the potential on runoff river is generally fairly well exploited, just because if it's easy to do, then you do it. The real issue with the power and the ability to modulate comes with dams. Even if you're not creating a big reservoir, actually, it is the case for Canabrava in Brazil, it is the case for Piau, etc. And all of these projects have been taken out of NG's green bond, all of them.
Yes, please, Madam.
Yeah. Thank you. Just to pick up on the second part of your question, I don't have the answer, but I think it's worth highlighting the importance of the question of nuclear, because if you look at the press recently, the data centers, AI systems are requiring huge amounts of energy, And several companies recently have announced plans to turn to nuclear. I think Google and AWS are looking at doing these small-scale nuclear types of energy sources that, when I've talked to some people at the companies, it's going to take several years to develop. Microsoft reportedly is looking at bringing back 3 Mile Island. So I think as we start to look at energy sources, there are definitely people in the ecosystem who are looking at nuclear, and to at least keep it as an open question on the table.
Sure. I think we have a specialist, yes, in the room of nuclear. Please, you have the floor. I don't.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I fully agree on the fact that there is a lot of development right now regarding new nuclear reactors, small-scale reactors, that can be very useful in terms of replacing some fossil plants, power plants, for dedicated usage. But it's still under development, and it will require some, let's say, at least 1 decade in order to be ready for operation. But it can be a real game changer regarding some type of applications.
Sir, and then you, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm a nuclear operator myself.
Could you please a little bit louder?
Okay. So my name is Octavian Roșcanastase. I'm working for a nuclear power utility in Romania, the only nuclear power utility in Romania. What I can tell you is that base load is very important in all energy systems, whatever we discuss about them. In Romania, we understood that the base load is critical for the energy security of the country, and the nuclear is providing for that. Now we have a mix of energy, that's true. Hydro amounts, it's the first actually after nuclear. But what I wanted to say is that in the discussion with the renewables, for example, I think nuclear can be very good for the intermittency of renewables and also complementary. I just wanted to say that we have an SMR project which is very good for data centers and useful for decarbonizing hard-to-abate industries. We actually are building this SMR, it's a new-scale technology, on a former coal power plant. So we can use much of the grids of the said coal power plant. But we also had in mind to use the mound of ash that was left behind after using the coal power plant. We actually used it to build solar panels on it in order to help at the construction of the project. So I think it's complementary to say that baseload sources with renewables can have a future in our plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to react? Yes, please.
Yeah, just maybe one quick point, because it's rebounding on something Marc-Antoine said earlier on, but I think we did talk about India and the need for coal. But until 2022 and the big hike in LNG prices or in natural gas prices, Germany in Europe was demonizing nuclear. And in Europe, it was impossible to talk about nuclear in any fashion or form. And I think that was a big change, right? Of the last 2 years, and Repower EU started talking about nuclear being an option. It was not an option in any discussion with our German friends for the last 30 years. So I think that's part of the reason why we're moving away. I think putting coal only on emerging markets is a bit unfair on emerging markets.
Mr. Shelma?
Just to rebound on that, I would just like to give you a case story. I was recently in Zambia. Zambia is a very important country for energy transition, because for energy transition we need copper. So Zambia, it's just south of Katanga. It's one of the big prospects for copper production. For a copper mine and for copper processing plants, you need energy. Zambia is probably at its maximum as far as hydroelectricity is concerned. The Zambezi is equipped, but they know that it will go down with less rains, so less hydropower. In Zambia, there are coal mines. And the problem is, as Jean Abiteboul said, nobody wants to to finance a coal mine, even if it is to produce power in order to produce copper, which we need for energy transition. Search the solution.
Yeah. Jeffrey, you want to add something? Please, your microphone.
No, I don't think I have anything to add to that discussion. I think it's very good.
I just want to ask you a question. I just read recently that in Colombia they found huge reserve of gas, and apparently they want to keep this reserve for their own purpose in the country, not to export it. Is it true or what?
Yeah, that's what I've heard as well. I mean, it's the same political dynamic that I was referring to before.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's a game changer that if you found now new resources, you want to keep for your own consumption?
I think the problem is, I mean, Colombia is in a good position where they're a net exporter of gas, but they understand also that their future growth will depend upon the availability of gas domestically, and so I think that's the issue. I'm interested to hear about the Argentine response to this problem.
So, Tomás, maybe you want to say something about what you have said, what have been said before, sorry, and then you move on. I'm very happy to welcome a representative of Argentina because it's an interesting country. New president, new regulation, huge resources. So, of course. Of course. Please, you have the floor, Tomás.
Thank you, Valérie. Good afternoon. It's really an honor to be here, and thanks for the invitation. If I come from Argentina, it's a 20-hour flight, 14,000 kilometers distance, and I work as a lawyer and in many energy projects, hydro projects, even nuclear projects, and renewable and gas projects in Argentina, Chile, Brazil, and even Uruguay. So I sort of come to tell a case study, or a story of the Argentine energy plan. I will read to stick to 7 minutes, okay? Yeah. Argentina has the determination of contributing to global security of supply and the mitigation of climate change through its vast natural resources while carrying out its own energy transition. Just a few facts to introduce my country, at least from an energy perspective. We're a federal republic. A new administration took office 1 year ago. Maybe you heard about President Milei, a free market revolutionary and a disruptor who happens to be an ally of President Trump. We're 47 million people, fifth in America, and have a 630 billion economy, the second largest in South America. We're about to produce 1 million barrels of oil per day, and we're exporting 50% of those volumes. We're producing 150 million cubic meters of gas per day. We're exporting 10% of that production to Chile and Brazil. We have a balanced energy mix, no coal, lots of hydro, lots of nuclear, and renewables, which in aggregate represent 40% of our energy mix. We produce only 0.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and our current NDC pledges not to exceed net emissions of 360 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030. Today, I want to focus on the energy plan of Argentina, its main assumptions, fundamentals, and its action points. So what is the plan? In 10 years, Argentina intends to export around 25 billion metric tons per annum through several LNG projects located over its Atlantic coastline. This would entail duplicating our current production. In the midterm, 5 years from now, and thanks to already installed interconnection pipeline capacity, we expect to export around 30 million cubic meters of gas per day to Chile, Brazil, Uruguay, and Bolivia. In respect of its neighbors in the southern cone, Argentine gas will substitute mainly coal in the case of Chile, liquid fuels and imported LNG, and as an insurance in drought seasons in the case of Brazil, fuel oil in the case of Bolivia, and as a backup of wind energy in the case of Uruguay. In respect of its potential LNG off-takers, the government and the Argentine gas industry are embarking in trade negotiations with the EU, Brazil, China, India, and other Asian countries. In fact, with the EU and Brazil, we already signed MOUs. The main assumptions of this plan are the following. First, the shale rock is there. Its productivity is even better than Permian, and development costs are being reduced constantly. The Vaca Muerta shale gas formation is considered the world's second largest shale gas deposit with 300 plus TCF of resources. Break-even prices are around $2 per million BTU, comparable to those in the US. Second, Argentine gas has a low carbon intensity. As McKinsey recently reported, Vaca Muerta's production processes are among the lowest carbon intensity for oil and gas operations worldwide. Third, the global energy transition will need Argentine LNG. Towards 2030 and onwards, the gap between projected demand and supply, including existing under construction and projects with FID, will be around 100 million tons per annum and growing. I defer to you. Let's finalize with the action points of the Argentine energy plan. First, regulatory action. During the past 10 years, Argentina has modernized its legislation to foster shale gas massive development. It has amended its hydrocarbons law to cap royalties and extend the life of exploitation concessions. It has amended its midstream regulations to allow contract carrier pipelines financed through shipper pay, long-term and firm contracts. Finally, it created an investment promotional regime that reduces taxes, eliminates currency controls, and provides numerous stability clauses, such as firm export rights and tax stability for 30 years. Now is the time for investors and financing institutions to believe or not in these regulatory promises. Second, Argentina arranged what I call the domestic business environment. First, it reduced labor costs by negotiating with unions, carrot and stick incentives in the relevant collective bargaining agreements. Second, it secured long-term gas supply to the domestic market by fostering long-term contracts between producers and domestic off-takers, mainly power generators and distribution companies serving residential users. Third, gas tariffs reflect the actual cost of natural gas. Put simply, Argentina is gradually eliminating energy subsidies. Third and finally, Argentina is decarbonizing its energy mix through a series of cumulative measures. One, increase wind and solar power installed capacity by unbundling the sector and allowing PPAs between producers and any type of energy consumers, both large and small, and by expanding the grid to reach isolated places with enormous wind potential. Interesting fact, in Patagonia, the capacity factors of our wind farms are around 70%. Two, replace fuel oil power generators with combined cycle gas-fired generators through the construction of gas pipelines to move the Vaca Muerta gas to the big industrial cities of Argentina. If we consider past and future conversions, we're talking about 10 gigawatts of power plants that now feed from gas rather than fuel oil. Three, reduce domestic emissions by establishing a cap-and-trade carbon market, sort of copying the emissions trading system of Europe, fostering domestic RED Plus jurisdictional programs, developing CCS projects in salt caverns in Bahia Blanca and depleted gas fields of Neuquén, and mandating methane reduction targets over the oil and cattle industries. As you know, each country is devising its own energy transition, considering its energy mix baseline, its natural resources endowment, and its economic possibilities. All these decarbonization measures require capital and financing, and the goal of Argentina is to finance part of that energy transition through its LNG experts. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Majdi, yes, please.
Thank you very much. I had just three short comments. First, we are in Argentina investing a lot, so I support and I totally agree with you. Second, I had a question about the nuclear and the SMR. Are they vulnerables? Are there any problem with any? I mean, we just remember Fukushima and you know the dérèglement climatique, all the catastrophic events. Mm-hmm. Is there any risk there? And third, I'd like to come back to methane and just say that there is an issue. The issue with torching also is very, very important because we can use this gas to produce electricity, to use it with renewable. That's what we're doing in Iraq, and it is working. And so it's really, it's not just for the planet, which is very, very important, but it's also for the countries that these gases can be used to produce electricity and help the country to have a better balance sheet.
Tomás, you want to comment or reply? Or?
No, just maybe on nuclear, because maybe Argentina is not that known for nuclear, but it's part of the International Organization of Nuclear Countries. But we have 3 reactors, and we developed technology for small reactors of 25 megawatts. Maybe the gentleman in the room knows about that, but there's social license for that. So we think that Argentina will grow that, but I think that the elephant in the room in nuclear is the capital cost of that. You know, I just read the last nuclear reactors in UK, and it takes 15 years and more than 10 billion to build a nuclear reactor. So I think that's the elephant in the room for nuclear to me.
Jeffrey, yes. Sorry, Jeffrey.
Yeah, thanks. That's interesting. I have a couple of questions. When you say that natural gas will no longer be subsidized for local consumption and would be sold at its actual cost, do you mean at the international price? Because if you're going to have the alternative of selling through via LNG exports or pipeline to Chile, will the domestic market be paying the same price as the export market, or will there be an inherent subsidy in the domestic market?
Wow, that's a big question, right? And the U.S. made that question or that dilemma, right? And probably the Henry Hub is still low in spite of all the exports, right? So the U.S. helps to answer that question, at least for Argentina, you know, because it is going to compare with what happened in the U.S. market. But what I can tell you is that we exported around 30 million cubic meters back in the 90s. And those exports and those long-term contracts with Chile and Brazil did not affect domestic prices, which is a big market, you know.
Weren't those contracts ultimately breached because the gas was
fully, and maybe the answer, exactly, and maybe the answer is because at some point when populism arrived in Argentina in the 2000s, in the commodity boom, etc., the government interfered in gas prices, in domestic gas prices, and exacerbated gas demand. And it was similar to Venezuela with the crude oil price and fuels, and exacerbated gas demand. So what the government now is doing is that the gas prices reflect the actual cost, those break-even prices that I'm talking about. So we do not exacerbate demand. And at the same time, producers also have intention to sell to the domestic market because it's a 150 million domestic market. It's good. So if the export contracts will compete to the domestic market, we still need to see that. If you base on the US, I think it's going to be a successful story. But at the same time, what the regulation establishes, the new regulation, is that the export permits will not be interfered once they are granted. So those contracts will be protected.
And so, if I may, that means that your prices, your prices would be pretty much like a Henry Hub prices?
You know, Argentina is a very liquid market. You know, almost the 24 provinces are connected to the grid. So it's the second largest country in gas penetration after Russia. So what I'm saying here is that the as long as the government allows the cost of gas, those break-even prices, to be transferred to the residential users and power plants, it's not going to be a problem.
Well, won't the problem be that if I'm producing gas and I can sell it at a higher price by exporting it, then why would I sell it at cost domestically? I guess that's the problem, because if you're just not that, and that's that would happen in the situation that you talked about with Chile. You're right. There was tons of export gas to Chile, but what happened was it eventually started to choke the supply domestically, and so the gas was diverted and the contracts were breached. And the reason why I think that was happening was gas producers weren't able to get the same price domestically as they were internationally. So it would be interesting to see how the policy
of course.
evolves.
Just 30% of the domestic market is regulated. The other 70% is free. It's industries, it's mining companies. The Argentine government would not be interested in protecting copper industries. The gas they will price is going to be freely negotiated. The same with power plants. So the problem is limited to 30%. So I don't see that such a big problem. And of course, every exporting country, except the U.S., has a domestic gas supply obligation. So maybe when they issue those extra permits, they establish, okay, at least 30% of production must be rerouted to the domestic market.
I've got two questions or two comments. Sir, and then Arash.
Yeah, if you can close off your mic, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I wanted to be back on what you mentioned regarding the cost of nuclear reactors. I do not fully agree with what you mentioned. You have to keep in mind that if you build only 1 or 2 reactors, for sure it's going to cost a lot. You need to industrialize the process. And it's what we already achieved in the past in France with success. It's what China is doing right now. And when you have a look on China, they are able to build a reactor in due time and due cost. It means between 4 and 5 years. And the overall cost, overnight cost at the end is really competitive. So I can give you more information if you want. I was a nuclear counselor at the French embassy in China, so I follow this program very precisely.
No, okay. Arash?
Just to come back to that price issue, also your question, obviously if you start exporting to Chile, you're going to have less supply. I mean, this is basically, if it's a given that you're pursuing free market policies, right? So obviously the supply will be going down in Argentina during that time, which will drive up the price once again, so the market can recalibrate in that sense, right? So I'm sure they've got that rationale behind that policy. Regarding nuclear, real quick, I think it's a fact that there hasn't been a single, nuclear plant that's been constructed ever in history without subsidies. So that might also be in the calculation of a, more free market type government. So in that sense, I think that's something that you're going to have to keep into consideration. Last point is, this is a question in the round, actually. So lots of things that we're talking about, a lot of the challenges, the answer is always, or the question is, where's the capital coming from? And that would be my question, actually. But if you see where the world economies are going, if you look at the interest rates right now, credit is very high. 10-year treasuries at 4.3%. German Bund is at 10-year highs at the moment. Same thing in England. So lots of economic indicators are actually signaling a red flag. What do you see as what would be the impact now on the energy transition in your mind? Because I think capital in this sense is central to everything that we're talking about at the moment. And it looks like capital prices, the cost is going up much higher.
Maybe, Nicolas, it's your time.
Thanks, for that. No, I'll try to get back on that. So just so you know from what place I'm speaking of. So I'm running a PE firm dedicated to energy transition, and the core focus we have is energy efficiency and energy flexibility, meaning that in our view, flexibility will be the major issue facing energy system, not just power, the energy systems coming in the next 10 to 20 years. I make 3 points, and I'll try to draw a few, either, certainly not conclusions, but ideas to go forward. First, I think one thing that strikes me compared to 3 years ago is the energy trilemma isn't dead. You know, and there was some sort of view after COVID that energy trilemma was dead, that renewable was solving everything, affordability, sustainability, and energy security. And I think that was a grave mistake, and now we are seeing the results of that. I think sustainability, and unfortunately, to your point, I think 1.5 is way off course. Way off course. There's no question here. Affordability, I'll come back on this, but in general, I think there are regions where energy transition is by nature inflationary. And in other places, it might not be, but this is a challenge. And on energy security, I think it's the current driving force. And so that's my second point is, I'll take here a European, because I would not dare speak of another standpoint. I'm a European. It's probably the place I know best, especially since my new role as a PE firm, not as a former NG guy. But I think there was a misconception on European energy security. We need to look, energy is a physical matter. We need to look at physical realities. Let's take oil and gas. Production of oil and gas in Europe, the two main powers in that front, the UK and Norway. The Crimean curve in the UK is more than flat. It's probably decreasing. I think it's 7% every year decreasing of production. Norway is also flattening. And one of the good, and I'm speaking under the control of TotalEnergies, sorry. I think most of the big majors have left Stavanger. I think you still have an office over there, but I know Shell has left, BP has left. So it means it says something about what's happening there. Then if you turn to, you could say, yeah, okay, but renewable energy, all good and fine. Average load factor in Europe for wind is 25%. For solar, it's 12%. US, 35% average load factor for wind energy, and it's around 17 to 18% for solar. It is a total different ballpark. Plus, you could add that we don't have the land mass compared to the US, where of course you could spread solar panels all across Nevada or I don't know, Arizona or whatever it is, and you would then, of course, you need the network. I'll come back to that. And so I will state something, because I've heard that for a number of years since the horrendous invasion of Ukraine by the Putin regime. Russian gas was indeed a rational option for Europe. There's no question here, and we were not naive about the fact that there was an interdependency. But of course, it was one of the cheapest way to achieve energy in Europe. And I think here I'm just trying to do a little bit of perspective. It is super important for Europe to think of the post-Putin era. There's no way we can work with Putin and its clique right now, no way. But we need to think of how we work with Russia as Europeans post-Putin. Because it will, if gas is a vector for energy transition, and I do believe it is, I do not see how Europe can turn its back on Russian gas. And of course, I'm reaffirming that it is impossible to consider in a situation where Putin is in power. I will just make a short comment from your point, Igor, on Chinese overcapacity. I can understand you say it's not really a matter to us. I think the magnitude of the overcapacity should be a concern to everyone. Just to give an idea, there's last year, 2023, there was 583 gigawatts of installed capacity of solar in the world. Chinese manufacturing capability of solar panels is 1.1 terawatt capacity. So almost double, exactly double that amount. This creates a huge matter. First, no PV manufacturer in China is gas generating, none of them. And I think it's also a very strong signal of how the Chinese are behaving. They're doing land grab, and once the land grab is done, it's very hard to get away from that. So I understand your point, but the magnitude is, in my view, very preoccupying.
Long-term, no question. But that's supposed to be Putin, so.
Understood.
Even with Putin, I heard this morning Hubert Védrine saying, as an assumption, that on the negotiation between Trump and Putin, the sanction could be ended. And in that case, the question of importing Russian gas again in Europe.
Not that easy.
Huh?
It's not that easy.
Igor,
Yeah.
please put your...
No,
But it's not impossible.
No, it's not impossible, but that's not that easy.
I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying that it's a possibility.
Yeah.
You never know.
The third point is really a question is, are we really moving away from, the extractive paradigm? And I would argue that we're not, unless we are really serious about recycling. If you look at the reality of energy transition, it's basically another extractive play, just in different matter. Practically, the evaluation from the National Mining Association, so the American Mining Association, but that looks at the world, is between now and 2040, we need 6 times the amount of minerals than what we are currently using. So basically, when we're talking about energy transition, if we don't recycle the solar panels, if we don't recycle the batteries, if we don't, we are just, it's not CO2 put in the air, it's just environmental extraction and environmental devastation that is just, it's another way of externality. And yes, investment amount are colossal. Just to give you an idea, between a CCGT is about 3,500 tons of steel, which is huge. But a 3 megawatt wind turbine is 330 tons of steel, around 5 tons of copper, 2 tons of rare earth materials, and 1,200 tons of concrete. So basically, to get to the same amount of steel, this is not even a tenth of the power that you have with a CCGT. Again, let's be clear. I am absolutely in favor of renewables, but this is the hard, true fact in terms of physical reality. Now, what does it entail is, one, massive investments are needed. This massive investment, again, will be inflationary, and I dare to say in Europe it is for certain, for one reason. We're not answering to a growing need in energy. We are trying to replace an existing system that works. The problem is you can't take out the CCGTs or the coal plants, so you're just piling investment over investment. So we need to stop saying to the Europeans that energy transition will be deflationary. This is false for the next 20 years. So we need to find ways to protect the most vulnerable, and we need to find ways to balance between public and private so that we remain both competitive and people are not just getting out in the street to protest against energy transition. If this happens against social cohesion, we will fail. This is for certain. The other element I would like to stress out is that I think we're moving away from an economics of production to an economics of logistics. And I totally agreed, and you mentioned also, Jeff, smart grids, and Marc-Antoine, you mentioned the massive underinvestment in grids. And I think it's not only grids. Yesterday there was a discussion on hydrogen, etc. The real issue of hydrogen is not the production, even green production. The real issue is transportation and storage. And frankly, if you are a big consumer of hydrogen, yes, you get the right price from the Air Liquides, the Linde, and the Air Projects of the world. But if you're a smaller player, the share that transportation and storage takes on your cost delivered, I'm going to say delivered ex-ship, but it's not ex-ship, but delivered to your plant, it's just horrendous. you get 8 to, let's say, 7 to 9 euro a kilo if you are Total in a refinery delivered by Air Liquide. But if you're a smaller company, the price can go up to 50 kilo.
Is that a technology problem, or is?
It is both a technology problem in the sense that the compression, you need probably to get to even more than 1,000 bar, and this is an issue, probably. But it's also, I think, a sort of oligopoly issue, frankly. And so I think, in general, we will be in a situation where logistics take a much bigger role in the overall value chain. So what can we do? I think first we need, and I think Pierre Jacquet said it yesterday, we need to better integrate externalities in our economic system, in our models. And I've been hearing this for 25 years when I started my career, and I don't think we've progressed one bit, save on two things. One, we've progressed on CO2 emissions through EU ETS, and there are initiatives in China, there are initiatives in the US, there are initiatives in a number of countries. This is going in the right direction, but we need a global carbon market. This is absolutely critical. Second, I think we need to recognize also the cost. There is a study that fell, I think, two weeks ago. Cost for the insurance market for climate change-related disaster in 2024, $600 billion. That is a cost of externality.
Nicolas, I'll just interrupt you because Majdi wants to say something.
No, thank you. No, I wanted to agree with you. I mean, costs are very, very, very important. It's the elephant in the room with grids, with all the money that we're going to need, and we have to say it. We're going to need a lot of money. At the same time, when we look at the US, you're right also, the US have it all. They have the oil, they have the gas, they have the sun, they have the wind, they have the land, they have the money, they have the knowledge, and they also have the way of doing things, which means, I'm thinking about the IRA, which means they're fostering a system that works when in Europe, even if we need a lot of money, we're doing it with over-regulation, which is one of the problems. We're saying, you need to do this, you need to do that. We're not fixing objectives, saying you need to decarbonize, and we leave to the business the best way to do it. We're telling them which method they should use for SAF, for e-fuels, and this is not the good way to do it. So of course we need a lot of money. We need a carbon market. We need lots of things, but we need also not to have too many regulation and over-regulation.
I was actually coming to that. I fully agree. And at the same time, let's look at the US, and I'm speaking under the control of my neighbor to the left, but the US do have a fairly extensive regulation. And we're talking about American content, the BABA regulation, which makes it impossible to be eligible to the Investment and Jobs Act or even to the IRA. I think what the Europeans have been massively naive is to say, oh, we're going to abide by WTO rules. Who are we kidding ourselves? And so I think we need to, first, I totally agree with you, regulations should be technology agnostic, and stop saying you go to hydrogen this way and you take that technology. I think this is absolutely a catastrophe. But at the same time, we need to create a market. To create a market, we need to say there needs to be European content in some key technologies. And I think just to finish off, and I'll stop there, but I think it's also, and I like your point on the US, I think there's also a moment of truth to European investors. The US have an appetite for risk, and we don't. I mean, let's be clear, we don't. I think the Europeans have thrived on the fact that there were fat returns coming from capital recycling in the early days of renewables. You were developing projects that let's say 14% IRRs, you're recycling them at 6% IRRs, and of course you were making huge amount of money. And people were saying this is energy transition. No, this is the easy part of the energy transition. That will be my final point. The hard part is coming, and the hard part in my view is very industrial. We will need to take risks. I think it goes back to the issue of logistics and grids. To take an example, who is going to take the risk to invest in dynamic line ratings, in power flow controllers, in power electronics, in GaN-based power electronics, etc.? When you talk to investors, to institutional investors, they understand batteries, and you could say, do they really understand the risk behind dispatching a battery? I'm not sure. But they understand renewables, stable, nice, When you come to these issues, they fly away in Europe, which I don't think they do in the US. And so there's a moment of truth where I say, as institutional investors, if you are serious about financing the energy transition, you cannot expect the same type of returns as what you've seen in the past. It will not be the same type of returns as oil and gas. We will not achieve 35% IRR, let's be clear. But I think it's what we need to do. And the reason why we need to do that is because the true cost of energy is not taken into account today. And this is where we need to head.
If I may just add on this last point, what we believe is that with this system, I try to explain integrated power, we really think that we can have a profit of 12%. It's not 25, it's not 30, 12%, which is basically what we will have with a barrel at $60. So it's not that bad. It's possible to do it, and we have to do it. Otherwise, people won't invest in renewables and in electricity and decarbonized way of producing electricity.
Arash, I use the floor.
Yeah, actually, Nicolas made my point. I was going to talk about the metal intensity of renewables. But also regarding the profits, especially in the infrastructure, the grids, and so on. Europe is very peculiar in the sense that, I mean, much of the industry, at least for instance in Germany, is quasi-semi-nationalized already. Many of these grids are regulated assets, so the profits are capped at 6-7% maximum. So there is no real incentive, and it's not inflation adjusted. So there are some issues, like structural issues with that.
Majdi? Yeah, Majdi?
No, you're right. We have to have more and more deregulated market if we want the development of renewables.
Nicolas?
But at the same time, if you look at the state, if you look at what they call the relief load hours, you compare that in Europe to the US, it's much higher in the US, and I think this is one of the main weakness of the US energy system. It's really the grids. You're right, but at the same time, there was an incentive to invest in European grids. Where there were no incentives was to be more and more efficient and to develop technologies that would enable to accommodate for the new reality of the energy system, which is more distributed and more intermittent. And I think here there's one thing we didn't touch upon is demand. We are talking about flexibility on the production side and the generation side, but there is no way we achieve that energy transition without flexibility on the demand side. And the link between the two is actually the grid. And what I think I'm not sure we should deregulate, frankly, the grid. I think we should incentivize the grid to invest quicker in solutions that enable the grid to be more responsive. This is not happening in Europe right now. But I think if we deregulate the grid, I am not sure it will channel the money efficiently to account for externalities. Because in general, market forces are not super good to account for externalities.
Monsieur Chalmin?
I wanted just to come back. You said we have to move away from the extractive world. We have to recycle. I think you're a bit dreaming. You'll probably recycle, for example, all the metals in the batteries, etc. Yes. But there is one product which they have in Zambia, for example, which is copper. And the copper, you will recycle copper inside a EV, for example, without any problem. But copper is used much in power transport and so on. The time life of copper is very, very long. So we'll still need extractive industries. And the Ethiopians, that's exactly the same people who are asking to have more and more energy transition, and we at the same time are fighting against any mine in the world. Christophe Troinceau could probably add to that, but it's clear that we need, unfortunately, we need more mines.
Maybe Tomás, you're coming from Argentina, you have a lot of lithium. Maybe you want to say something on that.
No, interesting, Nicolas, on recycling. I work with some Chinese clients that are extracting lithium, right, in Argentina. And what they mention is that after 10, 15 years of that battery usage, they expect to recycle that. And so they estimate the forecast of lithium production in the world will eventually drop because of the recycling. So that's just a story to tell you. But maybe I really like your idea of extractive paradigm. In fact, I live in a country in which, of course, we extract oil and gas, but we are now extracting a lot of lithium and copper for the energy transition. And the lithium rush we've seen with the prices of $80,000 a ton, it's amazing. And in spite of the tremendous drop in price, given that Argentina and Chile and Bolivia have brine extraction rather than rock as Australia, the production costs are around $8,000 a ton. So they can cope with these international prices. And Argentina is about, historically, I'm talking historically, about 8 years ago, only Chinese, some Americans, Livent, and some Australians. But now you can see the big ones. Rio Tinto has just announced a $2 billion investment and to produce 70,000 tons a year of lithium. That would place Argentina as the first producer of lithium in the world. Again, to be seen probably in 5 years from now, but interesting. Yeah.
May I fly the flag? Eramet, French company,
yes,
has
Eramet.
just opened
something
in, and at $10,000 per ton, they are not losing money. They don't seem to lose money.
But interesting, yeah. In fact, Eramet was a joint venture with Tsingshan. Tsingshan, they are metal producers in China, But interesting. They work on a technology, direct lithium extraction, that you can see that it's not fully tested yet, So that adds some uncertainty into the industry.
Yeah, maybe two additional points regarding the topic of mining and extractive industry. First one, to say that I'm back to the comparison or the evolution of the extraction. Roughly, the metals we are extracting right now from the ground is in the range of 2% of the overall materials we are taking from the ground. So even if it's going to increase, because we are developing renewables energy and so on, if we reduce at the same time the fossil fuels, we may have something which is more or less equilibrated all over time. And you have also to consider that these metals are used to build an infrastructure, not to be consumed as we do with the fossil fuels. Second point regarding the recycling, for sure it's very important, but it will never meet our demand, at least for the next maybe at least decades, maybe much more. I mean, what we are recycling right now, it's what we produced some decades ago, and it's not the same amount of materials, it's not the same types of metals. And just take the battery as an example. If you recycle the battery we are building right now, so you will get lithium, cobalt, nickel. I'm not sure that we will need these materials in 20 or 30 years from now, because as you may know, the technologies of batteries evolving very fast. So we have a kind of discrepancy between what you can get from the recycling and what you need. And whatever you do, you will always need some extraction of new metals. even if we have to try to reduce as much as possible.
Jeffrey, yes.
I just want to, I think, look, we've got to, I agree that recycling has got to be an important part of the solution here, but it's not going to be the only element of the solution because the need is so great. And it's interesting because in the U.S., even though there is this policy under the Biden administration to push for renewable energy and transition, the IRA was the hallmark of that policy initiative. There was a resistance to allowing copper mines to be developed. There's a Rio Tinto project, joint Rio Tinto BHP project that's been blocked for years, and I think you're right. There's a tension here. At the end of the day, we're going to need more copper, more nickel. I think we're going to be okay on lithium. I think there's going to be an oversupply. I think one of the reasons we're seeing the price be where it's at is there's probably going to be an oversupply of lithium in the market for some foreseeable future. But I think copper, in particular, there's going to be a great need for. One issue is that there's a permitting issue in places, including places like Chile, where copper is abundant and it's essential to the economy. There's resistance to allowing new mines to be developed because there is this tension between the environmental impact of new mines, but there's this cost to it, which is we're not going to produce enough copper for the battery production and other uses in energy. The other problem, though, that you highlight is that these projects are long-term projects, and so part of the problem is that if they're delayed, so for example, right now I think a number of nickel projects around the world are suspended, and in large part that's because there's a lot of uncertainty about the development of the electric vehicle market in the U.S., the growth prospects for China. And so the problem with delaying these projects is that by the time the electric vehicle market starts to develop in the U.S., you're suddenly not going to have enough nickel to supply for the battery chain, and we're going to have this issue where suddenly nickel prices will shoot up and there will be an absence of supply. So that's one of the issues that people are going to have to start to think about a solution to.
If I may, on nickel prices, I don't agree with you. It won't shoot up and for many, many years. And we would love nickel price to shoot up for New Caledonia, where we have some political problems. But you have a country called Indonesia. And Indonesia, with Chinese capital, has gone from producing 10% to 50% of nickel production. And the market is in overcapacity for years. When nickel, and I think Christophe was right, will we need nickel in batteries in 20 years? You still need nickel to make stainless steel. That's the main thing. So nickel is not a problem. The big problem is copper. And to my knowledge, one of the biggest copper potential projects is in the States, where it is unfortunately on the land of some Indian, how do you say, reserves. So
that's the Rio Tinto BHP project.
Yeah. Perhaps Donald Trump will allow it, but I don't know. But that's part of the problem. Any kind of mines in the world, you will have always problems. And I must say, when you look at the mining development in the mining and industrial development of nickel in Indonesia, it's not exactly, it's not perfect.
In order to wrap up everything, I would like to give the floor to all panelists for 2-3 minutes say final comments or questions or the way we can move forward together in terms of communication, for me what is important, towards our decision makers. So I would be very interesting to hear you. And please, if you could stay silent for the rest of the session, that would be great. I start with Jeffrey. Let's do.
Sorry,
You have 2-3 minutes to say what you want to say and how we should communicate to our decision makers to move forward in the energy transition in a pragmatic way.
Yeah, to me, the essential issue is what kind of role governments are going to play in energy transition, because I think that what we've heard in all of this discussion, whether it be in terms of having some sort of positive impact in terms of providing, helping to fill the gap in investment that's required, helping to deal with the question of upgrading smart grids, helping to allow the development of critical minerals such as copper for transition. I think the role of in my view, my takeaway from this discussion is government's going to need to take a more active and visionary approach to energy transition more generally, or else we're not going to make much progress.
Thank you. Nicolas?
Actually, I would follow up on Jeff's comment. I think, and we're talking about gas and how do we develop 20 or 30-year gas projects. I think there's an instrument that has been very little used is guarantees. And you don't have to necessarily put money on the table. You just have to guarantee a minimum return. And if at some point you say, okay, I've substituted coal through gas, and it worked on the trajectory, and at some point I need to substitute gas with something else, as long as the investor is not, does not find itself in a situation, well, government can step up, but that's probably in a 15-year time. So from a government perspective, it's completely palatable. You're not putting money down the table. You're just providing a guarantee. And I think that could be the kind of mechanisms that we could think of. And then the second element is to say, I really do think we need to work better on integration of externalities. And I think and here it would be a call on economists, it would be a call on everyone, but I think we're doing a very, very poor job in reforming the capital asset pricing model.
Thank you, Nicolas. Tomás?
Yeah, 2 things just to end on my participation, let's say, on behalf of Argentina. I think that the Argentine people learned that government spending must be reasonable. We learned the hard way that populism brings poverty. And that entails going to the energy, discussion that, for example, energy cannot be for free, and that is not a right, to have secure energy. And second, I would not say politicians in general, but I would say as a country, we learned the hard way that we need to gain credibility and that we need to establish rigid legal frameworks to attract investment, and we have to honor those regulatory promises. And that's the question: if we will persuade the international community to bring money to Argentina. And I think President Milei is putting again Argentina in the international arena. Let's see what happens.
Thank you, Tomás. Jean?
I would say 3 things. First thing, we need a carbon market. We need a carbon market. To me, it's a starter of everything. The second thing is that we need a realistic assumption of the energy needs. And today, unless I miss something, we didn't even evoke the IA the data centers, all the energy which is needed for this kind of usage, which I believe are huge. I read numbers about that, how many nuclear plants we would need to supply the data center. And the third thing is that in order to compare things which are comparable, when we talk about renewable versus hydrocarbons, we should take into account the full chain from the production to the final use. If we only take one part of the chain and say the renewable emit less carbon than oil and gas, that's true. But we should go from the mining industry, the recycling, everything, and to compare things which are comparable.
Thank you, Jean. Marc-Antoine.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think the example also from Argentina was very telling, because one of the first measures was to move energy prices to basically market price levels. And very clearly in the world we still have so many distortions due to fossil fuel subsidies and subsidized electricity prices, and all that makes energy systems inefficient, it slows down investment, it's a huge burden on public finances, and of course it maintains coal in many ways. And so the way forward, and that might be an interesting thing to follow. So Tesla told the Indonesians that they won't build a $5 billion automotive plant in Indonesia because there's too much coal in the system. And let's see next year if they go to Argentina and build that one in Argentina. And that would be a good reward for sounder energy policy.
Thank you, Marc-Antoine. Majdi, you have the final word.
Thank you very much. No, I would say we have to tell to the people the truth, to say things. I mean, we're trying always to explain that we cannot do the transition in 1 day, 1 year, 2 years. It takes time. And this message, maybe not everywhere, but it's not really understood. It takes time. It is not going to be the same transition for everyone. We don't have the same needs. We don't have the same priority. When we look the global south, when we look Africa, when we look other countries, we don't have the same priorities, and still we are the same planet. So we have to work together. So tell the truth, say that it's going to take time, say that it's going to take money, and somehow put the people in front of their contradictions. So because people want renewables, but they want them cheap. They don't want to see them. They don't want them in their backyard. And so we have to say that it is going to be costly. It's going we're going to need oil and gas for some time. And like we said, it is not going to happen quickly.
Thank you very much. So it's exactly 7 p.m. I really would like to thank you very much. I think the discussion was very interesting. Of course, we need to follow up on what has been said. And really, thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Thank you so much.
And thank you.